Mamdani is not just a Marxist. He is a propagandist for third worldism. Really, he is a propagandist for third worldism. I mean, the guy who was born in Uganda is a third worldist. Shocker, I know, an absolute shocker. And the number one third worldist cause that is near and dear to the very dark and depraved heart and soul of the mayor of New York City, of course, is the so-called Palestinian Arab cause, which is why Zohran Mamdani could not help himself, despite the fact that he is the mayor of the city in the world with the literal largest Jewish population of any city in the world. He couldn't help himself from releasing a highly propagandistic video just a few days ago on so-called Nakba Day. Maybe Nakba is a term you've heard, but you probably don't know what it actually means, and now the propagandists say it means. But before we get into that at all, though, let's go ahead and actually play just a snippet of this pretty outrageous video that Zohran Mamdani ran on so-called Nakba Day.
I was 9 years old. It was nighttime, and my father came into our bedroom and told us, surprisingly, to get on all fours and make our way to the staircase that goes in to the roof. There were no windows on the staircase because bullets had come in through the wood shutters at that stage. And next day, we just took what we could carry and went to my uncle Hussein's house in Nablus, because there was no fighting in Nablus. The Zionists were, coming into Jerusalem.
Okay, so this is apparently what your New York City taxpayer dollars are going towards, is videos like this. No, I wish I were kidding, but unfortunately I am very much not kidding. So first of all, just a very, very brief bit of history. In 1947, the year before Israel was founded, the United Nations voted for a partition, to partition the land, which was then the British mandate following the post-World War I carving up of the Middle East of the European powers. The United Nations, in its infancy, decided to vote for a two-state partition. The Jewish state, by the way, according to the UN, even according to their map, was this tiny, tiny, not even connected sliver. The Jews immediately said yes. They were just happy to not be genocide after what just happened in the Holocaust. The Arabs said no. A few months later, David Ben-Gurion declares independence of Israel, and immediately, at least 5 different Arab countries send in their troops to try to annihilate the Jewish state. You had Lebanon, you had Syria, you had Egypt, you had Iraq, all trying to throw the Jews into the ocean. The term Nakba, as was originally introduced by a Syrian academic, a Syrian public intellectual, Nakba, which does refer to disaster or catastrophe, refers to the fact that the Arabs failed. It refers to the fact that they failed to annihilate and genocide the Jews. That's literally what it meant. It does not mean today what the SJP crowd, what this video says it means. It literally referred originally to the failure to annihilate the Jews. Okay, that's the real history. They're not telling you that. That's actually what it refers to. But there's a lot more to unpack here, folks. We'll be right back after one final commercial break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Oh, sorry. Welcome back. So, again, the history that you're not hearing anywhere is that the term Nakba, which is a term that you hear all the time from the so-called Students for Justice in Palestine crowd, SJP, all the typical keffiyeh-clad campus jihadis who are marching in the streets saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free there. They're not telling you that Nakba actually referred, when the term was first coined, to the failure of the invading Arabs to kill all the Jews. As it comes to the individual in this Mamdani propaganda video, a woman whose family name is Bushnak, what she is not telling you is, it's actually dripping with irony. She's actually of Bosnian descent. Her family comes from southeastern Europe, the Balkans. Her family came from Bosnia. They settled in Syria in the early 20th century before eventually going to Jerusalem. So ironically, this woman is actually exactly what the SJP crowd says that the Jews are. European colonizers, European settlers there in the Holy Land. But it actually gets better. Her own family story, she says that she was uprooted by the invading Zionists in Tulkarm. Yes, her family was apparently in a small town in Judea and Samaria, aka the West Bank, called Tulkarm. Well, by definition, the Jews could not have kicked her out of Tulkarm in 1948 when the Arabs started the war. By definition, because the Jews didn't control Tulkarm. It was literally controlled by the Jordanians. It was controlled by the Arabs at that time. So what actually happened, the video that you saw, the statistic of 700,000 Arabs who fled, The number is roughly correct. We can debate the finer details. But again, the devil in the details, the Jews didn't kick the Arabs out. What actually happened was that you had a lot of the Arab leaders, including the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who was a noted Hitler ally, visited Hitler in Berlin during World War II. So this Nazi Arab leader told the Arabs who were living in the land of Israel, in Judea and Samaria, etc., said, leave. You know why you should leave? Because we want to kill the Jews. Like, leave so that all the Arab armies can kill the Jews, finish the job, and then you can come back in and resettle. That was literally why this woman probably left Tulkarm, was that she was listening to the Jordanian authorities, the Syrian authorities, the Egyptian authorities, or the Grand Mufti himself, who was this Muslim Brotherhood type figure ruling the Arab community there in Jerusalem. One final note about this video, because it's just so utterly delectable. So you may or may not have been able to see this poster that is seen behind her on the wall. It is a poster that is a view of the old city of Jerusalem, and you see the mosque, you see the walls of the old city, and it says in big letters, "Visit Palestine." If you squint really, really carefully, if you freeze frame on this graphic and you zoom in, and I would never have noticed this were it not for an excellent op-ed this morning from Leo Leibovitz over at the New York Post who pointed this out. If you zoom in there, you will actually see that the artist signed his name of this painting. And he signed it in Hebrew because he's a Jew, because he's a Jewish guy, actually. The guy who did that painting on the wall of the video that you saw there is a Jewish guy by the name of Franz Kraus. Sounds like a very German name because it is. He came from an Austrian Jewish family. He was forced to flee Austria due to the rise of the Nazis, and he settled in the Holy Land. The Holy Land, which at the time was just called Palestine, because it was still using this Romanized name that the Romans first introduced after the Romans destroyed the Second Temple and ethnically cleansed the region of the Jews. So it indeed was called Palestine for a very long time, again going back to the year 70, because of what the Romans did. But in the 1930s, in the lead up to World War II, the Holy Land, which still had a lot of Jews at the time, was referred to as Palestine, which is why this Jewish artist said, visit Palestine. You go back and you look at the so-called Palestinian soccer teams from the 1930s, there actually are videos and photos of this there. You will see them not wearing a green, red, white, and black jersey. They're wearing a blue jersey with a gold star because they're a bunch of Jews. Their names are like David and Shlomo, not Mahmoud and Ahmed. In fact, my father-in-law's mother, so my wife's paternal grandmother, was a Jew born in the land of Israel before 1948, before Israel was a modern country. So she was born as a quote-unquote Palestinian. By the way, she was born there even though her family was Iraqi, because her family had already fled Iraq because of all the pogroms by the Arabs on the Jews happening around the time that Israel was founded. So to the extent that there was a legitimate Nakba, a legitimate genocide, a legitimate ethnic cleansing, the more historically accurate part of that picture is the 800 to 900,000, give or take, Jews who were forcibly kicked out of all of the Arab countries. It's called the Farhad. That's the historical term. Around the same time that Israel was founded. They were kicked out of Iraq, kicked out of Libya, Egypt, Syria, where there's a long community there in Damascus, Aleppo. They were kicked out of all these countries around the same time. And not just kicked out, a lot of them were murdered, there were pogroms, their property was expropriated, there were mass rapes and sexual violence, as the Arabs sometimes do, as we now know from the October 7th report that just came out this past week. So that is the real Nakba. Again, Nakba itself is a fake term, right? It was invented by this Syrian professor to refer to the so-called catastrophe that the Arabs didn't actually genocide the Jews in 1948.